and lived to tell about it. The key word there being lived, which apparently makes me some kind of expert on human combat doctrine. Today, I announced to the sea of various alien faces staring back at me. We're going to discuss the most dangerous species in known space. Can anyone guess who that might be? A crystalline student in the front row raised what I assumed was a hand. Hard to tell with those guys. The Harvester Collective, sir? Good guess. Wrong, but good guess. I gestured to the holographic display behind me, which flickered to life showing a rather unimpressive bipedal figure. This is a human. Average height, 1.7 meters. Average weight, 70 kilograms. No natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, no psychic abilities. They can't even see in multiple spectrums. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Oh, if only they knew. They're also, I continued, the reason the Centauri Empire went from controlling 17 systems to, well, let's just say we're very interested in peaceful coexistence these days. The laughter died pretty quickly. You see, 5 years ago, I was Colonel Vexthul Kranis of the 47th Centauri Shock Regiment. We were considered elite, 7 feet tall, natural armor plating, 4 arms, and a military tradition that stretched back 12,000 years. We'd conquered 47 worlds and never met an enemy we couldn't crush with superior firepower and tactical brilliance. Then we met humanity. Sir, piped up a young arachnoid from the middle section. How can such a weak species be dangerous? They lack any significant natural weapons. I couldn't help but laugh. Not the good kind of laugh, mind you. The kind that makes people worry about your mental health. That, I said, pulling up footage from the Battle of Kepler Station, is exactly what we thought. Chapter 2. First contact goes exactly as expected. Spoiler, it doesn't. Let me set the scene for you. Kepler Station was supposed to be a routine annexation. Small human mining outpost, maybe 300 personnel, minimal defenses. Intelligence suggested they had some basic projectile weapons and a few patrol craft. Nothing our battle group couldn't handle before breakfast. We jumped in with 2 destroyers, 4 frigates, and my shock regiment loaded for bear. Standard procedure. Demand surrender, allow 12 hours for compliance, then demonstrate why resistance is futile. Simple, clean, efficient. The first sign something was wrong came when they responded to our surrender demand. Unknown vessels, came the transmission. This is Station Commander Pierce. You are ordered to withdraw from Terran space immediately, or we will consider your presence an act of war. My ship's communications officer looked at me with what passed for confusion among the Centauri. Sir, should I explain that we have them outgunned approximately 50 to 1? No need, I replied confidently. They'll figure it out soon enough. Oh, how wrong I was. Instead of the expected capitulation, what we got was silence, for 11 hours and 58 minutes. Just as I was about to give the order to commence bombardment, every sensor on every ship in our battle group lit up like a festival display. Contact! My tactical officer barked. Multiple contacts, Spectre. Everywhere, sir. The humans had somehow hidden an entire fleet in the system's asteroid belt. Not a small fleet either. We were looking at 60 ships, minimum, all broadcasting active targeting locks. But here's the thing that should have tipped me off to how monumentally screwed we were. They waited. They had us dead to rights, perfect firing solutions, superior numbers, tactical advantage, and they waited exactly 2 minutes. Just long enough for us to realize how thoroughly we'd been outmaneuvered. Then Commander Pierce's voice came over the comm again, and I swear I could hear him smiling. Gentlemen, you have 10 seconds to surrender or we will demonstrate why attacking humans is generally considered a bad career move. Your choice. I should have surrendered right then and there. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Instead, being a proud Centauri warrior with a tradition of victory and a reputation to maintain, I gave the order to attack. Biggest mistake of my military career. Possibly my entire life. Chapter 3. Things go from bad to why did we even come here? You know what the difference is between Centauri military doctrine and human military doctrine? We focus on overwhelming firepower and frontal assault. Humans focus on making you question your life choices. The battle started conventionally enough. We opened with our heavy plasma cannons. They responded with their kinetic weapons. Standard ship-to-ship engagement, nothing unusual. For about 30 seconds. That's when the humans decided to get creative. Sir, my tactical officer called out. The human vessels they're doing something strange. Strange didn't begin to cover it. Instead of maintaining formation and trading shots like civilized spacefaring races, the human ships scattered in what appeared to be random directions. 3 of them actually flew directly toward our heaviest destroyer, the Vengeance of Centauri. Suicide run, I concluded. Desperate, but predictable. Except it wasn't a suicide run. At the last possible moment, all three ships released what looked like debris, chunks of metal, broken equipment, random junk. Our point defense systems tracked and destroyed it all, naturally, because that's what point defense systems do. What they don't do is account for the fact that humans are apparently insane enough to use their own garbage as a distraction while they ram boarding pods through your shields. Boarding pods? My security chief asked when the proximity alarm started going off. How did they get boarding pods through our shields? They didn't use boarding pods, I replied, watching the sensor data with growing horror. They used escape pods. Modified escape pods. Launched from inside the debris field. Let me paint you a picture of human engineering philosophy. If it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. These lunatics had gutted their escape pods, filled them with marines and breaching charges, and shot them at us like bullets. The debris was just to mask the signature until it was too late to shoot them down. Sir, my security officer reported, we have boarders on deck 7, 12, and... How did they get onto deck 4? That's in the middle of the ship! That's when I learned about human-shaped charges. Apparently, if you can't get through the front door, humans will just make their own door. With explosives. Lots of explosives. Chapter 4. Meeting humans up close and personal. You might think that after 12,000 years of military tradition, the Centauri would be pretty good at repelling boarders. You'd be right, against any reasonable enemy. Humans, as I was rapidly discovering, are not reasonable. The security feeds from Deck 7 showed a textbook marine assault. Humans in powered armor moved with perfect coordination, using cover effectively, advancing by fire and maneuver. Professional, competent, exactly what you'd expect from a trained military force. The security feeds from Deck 12 showed something that belonged in a horror movie. Sir, my security chief reported, the humans on Deck 12 are... They're singing. Singing. Yes, sir. And they appear to be... improvising weapons from our own equipment. I switched to the feed and immediately regretted it. 3 humans, out of their powered armor for some incomprehensible reason, were systematically working their way through my ship's engineering section. They'd somehow weaponized our own maintenance tools and were using them with terrifying efficiency. One of them had turned a plasma cutter into some kind of sword. Another had rigged an emergency beacon into what I can only describe as an explosive device. The third was dual-wielding crowbars like they were ceremonial weapons. And yes, they were singing. Some ancient human battle hymn about showing up and causing trouble. The acoustics in the engineering section made it echo ominously through the entire ship. What about Deck 4? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. My security chief's expression went through several colors before settling on what I interpreted as existential dread. Sir, I think you need to see this for yourself. The Deck 4 feed showed a single human. Just one. Sitting cross-legged in our main computer core, surrounded by about 30 unconscious Centauri security troops. He wasn't armed, wasn't wearing armor. Hell, he wasn't even wearing a shirt. Apparently he'd used it to tie up the security chief. He was just sitting there, typing on our main computer with the casual air of someone checking their messages. How long has he been there? I demanded. Best guess? Since before we jumped into the system, sir. Let me repeat that for the folks in the back. This human had somehow stowed away on a Centauri warship, hidden in our computer core for over 24 hours, and then single-handedly neutralized an entire security detail without firing a shot. What's he doing to our systems? Unknown, sir. He's locked us out of everything above basic life support. But he did leave us a message. The main screen flickered, and suddenly I was looking at text written in perfect Centauri script. Hi there. Thanks for the hospitality. Don't worry about your crew. They're just sleeping. Should wake up in a few hours with mild headaches and bruised egos. I've taken the liberty of downloading your tactical database and navigation charts. Hope you don't mind. Also, your ship's food synthesizers need serious recalibration. Seriously, how do you eat that stuff? Anyway, you might want to surrender now. Trust me on this one. Your friendly neighborhood human PS. I'd hurry if I were you. My friends get cranky when they have to work overtime. Chapter 5. The situation deteriorates rapidly. At this point, you might be wondering why I didn't just order an immediate retreat. After all, we still had 5 ships to their... well, however many they actually had. The asteroid belt was playing havoc with our sensors, so we never did get an accurate count. The answer is pride. Stupid, stubborn, species-defining pride. Also, retreating would have meant explaining to High Command how we'd been outmaneuvered by a primitive species. My career would have been over, assuming I survived the court-martial. So instead of making the smart choice, I made the Centauri choice. All ships fall back to defensive formation, I ordered. Concentrate fire on the human vessels, and somebody get those boarders off my ship. What followed was 15 minutes of the most one-sided battle I've ever witnessed. And we weren't on the winning side. The humans didn't just fight, they played. Their ships moved like dancers, weaving between our shots with impossible precision. When they did take hits, their damage control was so efficient that ships we'd crippled were back in the fight within minutes. Meanwhile, our formation was falling apart. The humans were using some kind of electronic warfare that turned our own targeting systems against us.
Twice I watched our ships fire on each other because their computers thought they were aiming at human vessels.
"Sir," my communications officer reported, "I'm getting surrender requests from the Dominator and the Iron Fist." "Denied," I snapped. "We don't surrender to primitives." "Sir, the Dominator is reporting that humans have taken their bridge. The surrender request is coming from the humans." I stared at him.
What do you mean the surrender request is coming from the humans? They're offering to accept our surrender, sir, on behalf of the ship they just captured.
Before I could process that particular piece of insanity, my tactical officer started cursing in 3 languages.
"What now?" I demanded.
"Sir, the human ships they're moving to formation."
"What kind of formation?"
"I don't know, sir. I've never seen anything like it." I looked at the tactical display and felt my blood chill. The human ships were arranging themselves into what could only be described as artistic patterns. One group had formed a perfect spiral. Another had somehow managed to spell out what our translation software claimed was a rude gesture in human script. They were showing off. Chapter 6. The Human Definition of Overkill. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, my sensor operator made an announcement that will haunt me for the rest of my considerably shortened lifespan.
"Sir, massive energy signature detected. Something big is jumping in."
The something big turned out to be a human dreadnought that was approximately twice the size of our entire battle group combined. It materialized out of hyperspace with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested humans had been watching the whole fight and waiting for the perfect moment to make an entrance. The ship was absolutely massive, easily 2 kilometers long and bristling with enough weapons to sterilize a small moon. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was the message it broadcast on all frequencies. "Unknown alien vessels. This is Admiral Brooks of the Terran Navy battleship Overwhelming Response. You are hereby ordered to cease hostilities and surrender immediately. This is your only warning." My communications officer looked at me with what I now recognize as barely contained panic. "Sir, should I respond?" "Yes," I said, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. "Inform the Admiral that we are Colonel Krathos of the Centauri Empire, and we do not recognize human authority in this system." "Well, Colonel Krathos, that's unfortunate, because we're about to give you a demonstration of why arguing with humans is generally considered a poor life choice. The dreadnought didn't fire its main guns, didn't launch missiles, didn't even power up its weapon systems. Instead, it launched what appeared to be a single small craft, maybe the size of a shuttle." "Sir," my tactical officer reported, "single small craft approaching, minimal threat profile." The small craft flew directly to my flagship and attached itself to our hull with what sounded like a very polite knock. "Sir," my security chief reported, "we have visitors." Chapter 7. Diplomatic Relations. The visitors turned out to be 3 humans in what could charitably be called diplomatic attire if you ignored the fact that they were armed to the teeth and radiating an aura of barely contained violence. They didn't break down the airlock, didn't cut through the hull with plasma torches. They just knocked politely and waited for us to let them in. Which, after 15 minutes of internal debate and several increasingly polite knocks, we did. The lead human was a woman who introduced herself as Captain Elena Cross, Diplomatic Corps. She was maybe 1.6 meters tall, had graying hair, and smiled like someone who knew secrets that could end civilizations. "Colonel Krathos," she said pleasantly, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can resolve this situation without any further unpleasantness." "Unpleasantness?" I repeated. "You've boarded my ships, captured 2 of my vessels, and threatened us with a dreadnought." "Oh, that." Captain Cross waved dismissively. "That's just Tuesday for us. Would you like some tea?" She actually brought tea, in a proper service set, with little cakes. "Captain Cross," I said carefully, "what exactly do you want?" "Well, that's a good question." She poured herself a cup and settled back in her chair like she was visiting old friends. "Officially, we'd like you to leave human space and never come back. Unofficially, we'd like to understand why you thought attacking a human colony was a good idea." "We are the Centauri Empire," I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. "We do not explain our actions to lesser species." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Captain Cross set down her teacup with a soft click. "Lesser species," she repeated thoughtfully. Interesting perspective from someone whose superior fleet is currently at our mercy. You caught us off guard, I protested.
In a fair fight. Colonel, she interrupted gently, there's no such thing as a fair fight. There are only fights you win and fights you lose. And right now, you're losing.
She was right, of course, but admitting it would mean acknowledging that humans were more than the primitive species our intelligence reports had claimed.
What are your terms? I asked finally. Simple, Captain Cross replied.
You leave.
You don't come back. And you tell everyone you meet that humans are not to be trifled with.
That's it?
That's it.
Oh, and we keep the ships you brought us as compensation for the inconvenience.
Compensation? I sputtered.
Those are military vessels of the Centauri Empire.
Were, she corrected pleasantly. Now they're prizes of war. Don't worry, we'll take good care of them. Might even name one after you. Chapter 8. The Learning Experience. What happened next is why I ended up giving lectures instead of commanding fleets. I should have accepted Captain Cross's generous terms and limped home with what little remained of my dignity and my command. Should have reported the encounter as a tactical withdrawal in the face of superior numbers and unexpected resistance.
Instead, I made one final catastrophically stupid decision.
I demand trial by combat, I announced.
Captain Cross blinked.
I'm sorry, what? Trial by combat, I repeated.
Single combat between champions. Winner takes all. It's an ancient Centauri tradition. When diplomacy fails and honor is at stake, disputes can be settled by personal combat between chosen representatives. The idea being that the universe favors the righteous.
Captain Cross looked at her two companions, then back at me. You want to settle an interstellar incident with a fistfight? Combat of honor, I corrected. Choose your champion. She was quiet for a long moment, then smiled that terrifying smile again. Colonel, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once we agree, there's no backing out.
I am certain. And you understand that if you lose, you accept all our previous terms plus whatever additional conditions the winner chooses to impose?
Yes. And if you win, we withdraw and leave you alone? Correct.
Captain Cross nodded thoughtfully.
Okay then, give me a few minutes to make some calls.
Chapter 9. The Champion. 20 minutes later, Captain Cross returned with her chosen champion. I was expecting some kind of enhanced super soldier. Maybe someone in powered armor or with cybernetic implants. What I got was a maintenance worker named Victor. Victor was maybe 1.75 meters tall, slightly overweight, and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. He wore grease-stained coveralls, carried a toolbox, and had the tired expression of someone who'd been pulled away from important work to deal with someone else's stupidity.
This is your champion? I asked.
This is Victor, Captain Cross confirmed.
Victor, this is Colonel Krathos. He wants to fight you.
Victor looked me up and down, taking in my 7 feet of height, natural armor plating, and 4 arms. Then he looked back at Captain Cross.
Seriously? He asked.
Seriously. Victor sighed, set down his toolbox, and cracked his knuckles.
Well, shit, okay then.
My champion was Warrior Prime Zethek, finest blade master in the Centauri military. 7 feet of muscle, bone, and natural armor, trained from birth in 17 different combat disciplines, and armed with energy weapons that could cut through battleship hull plating. The fight lasted approximately 15 seconds. I'm still not entirely sure what happened. One moment Zethek was advancing with ceremonial confidence, energy blades humming. The next moment he was unconscious on the deck with Victor standing over him, looking mildly annoyed.
How? I demanded.
Victor shrugged.
Physics, mostly.
Plus, he telegraphed his moves like he was directing traffic. You guys don't actually fight much, do you? Captain Cross patted Victor on the shoulder. Thanks, Victor. Go ahead and get back to fixing the waste recycler.
Sure thing, Cap.
Victor picked up his toolbox and headed for the door. Next time, maybe pick someone who's actually dangerous, he called over his shoulder. And just like that, the Centauri Empire's military reputation died with a whimper instead of a bang. Chapter 10. Terms and Conditions. Captain Cross was very gracious in victory. She didn't gloat or make speeches about human superiority. She just sat back down, poured another cup of tea, and got down to business. Right then, she said. New terms. You leave human space immediately and don't come back.
Ever.
You return our people and property from any previous raids. Yes, we know about those. And you spread the word that humans are under the protection of the Terran Navy. And in return? I asked weakly. In return, we don't tell everyone in the galaxy that your entire battle group was defeated by a maintenance worker named Victor. It was a generous offer. Probably more generous than we deserved. There's one more thing, Captain Cross added. We'd like you to serve as a liaison. Someone to help other species understand what they're dealing with when they encounter humans. A liaison? Think of it as a cultural exchange program. You tell people about human capabilities. We don't have to demonstrate them quite so dramatically. And that's how I ended up here, at the Galactic Military Academy, trying to explain to bright-eyed cadets why picking a fight with humans is roughly equivalent to juggling live grenades while riding a unicycle through a minefield. Chapter 11, the Q&A session. Sir, asked a mollusk cadet from the back row, if humans are so dangerous, why haven't they conquered the galaxy? It was a fair question. After all, if humans could casually defeat a Centauri battle group, what was stopping them from expanding across the galaxy like every other aggressive species? That, I said, is probably the most terrifying thing about them. I pulled up a star chart showing human territory. It was disappointingly small, maybe 30 systems, all clustered around their home world of Earth. This is human space, I announced. Notice anything unusual? A crystalline student raised a tentacle. It's small, sir? Exactly. Despite having the military capability to conquer half the galaxy, humans have shown almost no interest in territorial expansion. They explore, they trade, they establish colonies, but they don't conquer. Why not? Asked the arachnoid. Because they don't need to. Think about it. What's the traditional reason for military expansion? Resources? Humans can synthesize almost anything they need. Living space? They've barely colonized their own solar system. Strategic advantage? They're already sitting on the most defensible position in known space. I switched the display to show Earth's solar system. Their home system is a fortress. Asteroid mining platforms that double as weapons platforms. Orbital habitats that can serve as military bases. A ring of automated defense stations that could probably hold off the entire Harvester Collective. A student in the middle section raised what I assumed was a hand. Then why do they seem so peaceful? I laughed. Not the bitter laugh from before, but genuine amusement. They're not peaceful, I corrected. They're confident. There's a difference. Peaceful species avoid conflict. Confident species don't need to seek it out because they know they can handle whatever comes their way. But sir, persisted the mollusk, surely their government must have some expansionist agenda. That's the beautiful irony, I replied. Their government can barely get them to agree on local policies, let alone galactic conquest. Humans are incredibly individualistic. Getting them to work together on anything requires either a really good reason or a really compelling threat. I pulled up footage from the battle again. But when they do work together, well, you've seen the results. Chapter 12. The Real Horror Stories. Sir, asked a young Centauri cadet, one of the few left in the academy after our species' recent diplomatic repositioning, what's the worst thing you've personally witnessed humans do in combat? Now that was a loaded question. Where do you even start with human military innovation? Well, I said, settling in for what was going to be a long story. There was the incident at Vega Station. Vega Station was a pirate stronghold, heavily fortified, well-armed, and protected by about 50 ships of various sizes. They'd been raiding human shipping for months, always careful to avoid direct confrontation with Terran Navy vessels. The humans sent a single ship to deal with them. Not a dreadnought or a battlecruiser. A cargo hauler. Specifically, the Persistent Optimism. A civilian freight vessel with minimal weapons and a crew of 12. Surely that was a mistake, suggested the crystalline student. Humans might be dangerous, but they're not suicidal. That's what the pirates thought, I replied. They laughed at the surrender demand, called it a joke, told the humans to come back with a real warship. The Persistent Optimism acknowledged the refusal politely and requested permission to dock for repairs. The pirates, thinking they had an easy prize, agreed. What they didn't know was that the cargo hauler was loaded with what humans euphemistically call industrial supplies. The ship docked normally, I continued. Crew disembarked for repairs. Standard procedure, nothing suspicious. They spent about 6 hours working on their ship, chatting with station personnel, buying supplies from the local merchants. And then? Prompted the arachnoid. Then they left, just undocked and warped out without incident. The pirates were confused but figured they'd lucked out. Easy money from selling supplies to the humans, no violence, no complications. I paused for effect. The station exploded approximately 30 minutes later. The classroom erupted in confused chatter. I held up a hand for silence. The humans hadn't brought weapons, I explained. They'd brought mining charges. Lots of them. While repairing their ship, they'd systematically placed shaped charges throughout the station's structural supports. When they detonated, the entire station came apart like a puzzle someone had sneezed on. But sir, protested the mollusk, that's cheating. No, I corrected gently. That's humans. They don't play by the same rules as the rest of us because they don't think like the rest of us. Where we see a military problem requiring military solution, they see an engineering problem requiring creative application of physics. A gaseous student in the corner fluctuated what I interpreted as concern. Are there other examples? Oh boy, were there other examples. Chapter 13. The Anthology of Human Insanity. The Kepler mining incident, I began, and watched several students immediately start taking notes. Good, they were learning. Human colony world, recently established, minimal defenses. The Ravager fleet decided it would make an easy target. 300 ships strong, enough firepower to glass a planet. I pulled up tactical displays from the incident. The humans had exactly 12 ships. Old models, mostly converted civilian craft. By any reasonable military analysis, they were doomed. What happened? Asked the Centauri cadet. The humans evacuated their population to underground shelters, then proceeded to demonstrate why attacking a mining colony might not be the smartest tactical decision in the galaxy. The display showed orbital footage of the battle. It looked like chaos, explosions, debris fields, ships maneuvering in apparently random patterns. The colonists had been mining asteroids for rare metals, I explained. What the Ravagers didn't know was that they'd also been stockpiling antimatter as a byproduct of their fusion reactors. A collective intake of breath from the students. Antimatter wasn't weapons grade by itself, but in sufficient quantities. The humans loaded cargo ships with antimatter containers and flew them directly into the Ravager fleet, not as missiles as improvised nuclear weapons. Each ship that detonated took out a dozen Ravager vessels. That's suicide, whispered the crystalline student. The cargo ships were automated, I corrected. The human crews evacuated in escape pods moments before impact. They turned their own mining equipment into the most devastating weapons the Ravagers had ever faced. I switched to casualty reports. Final tally. Ravager fleet eliminated in its entirety. Human losses, 0 ships, 0 personnel. Property damage, 12 automated cargo haulers that were scheduled for replacement anyway. The classroom was dead silent. And that, cadets, is why you never attack human industrial centers. They have this annoying habit of turning their infrastructure into weapons. Chapter 14. The Philosophical Implications. A student I hadn't noticed before, some species I didn't recognize with too many eyes, raised what might have been a hand. Sir, if humans are so militarily capable, why do they continue to allow weaker species to exist? Surely evolutionary pressure would favor eliminating competition. It was a smart question. Most aggressive species followed predictable patterns. Expand, conquer, consolidate, repeat. The strong survived, the weak were absorbed or eliminated. Basic galactic politics. Humans broke the pattern entirely. That's the question every xenopsychologist in the galaxy is trying to answer, I admitted. Near as anyone can tell, humans have this bizarre concept called fairness. I pulled up trade data from the last 5 years. Look at this. Humans consistently offer favorable trade terms to smaller species. They provide military protection to colonies that can't defend themselves. They share technology freely with anyone who asks nicely. But why? Persisted the multi-eyed student. Because, I said slowly, they don't see the galaxy as a zero-sum game. Most species operate on the assumption that for them to win, someone else has to lose. Humans somehow reach the conclusion that everyone can win if you're smart about it. I switched to a map showing human trade routes. They've turned their entire region of space into an economic powerhouse by making sure everyone prospers. Their weakness is actually their greatest strength. They've made themselves indispensable. Sir, asked the arachnoid, what happens if someone threatens their trade partners? I smiled grimly. Ask the hegemony of Kel. The hegemony had been a mid-level power, not strong enough to threaten humans directly, but certainly capable of bullying smaller species. They'd made the mistake of trying to impose tribute on some human trade partners. The humans sent a diplomatic note expressing their displeasure and requesting that the hegemony reconsider their position. The hegemony ignored it. 3 months later, the hegemony no longer existed as a political entity. Not because the humans conquered them, but because every single one of their trade partners, military suppliers, and economic dependencies had simultaneously decided to do business elsewhere. Economic warfare, I explained. Humans didn't fire a single shot. They just arranged for the hegemony to become completely isolated. Amazing what happens to a spacefaring civilization when no one will sell them starship fuel. Chapter 15. The Cultural Exchange. Sir, asked the young Centauri cadet, have you actually spent time with humans? I mean, beyond military encounters? That was a more personal question than I'd been expecting, but it deserved an honest answer. Yes, I said. As part of my liaison duties, I spent 6 months on Earth cultural immersion program. I'd been dreading the assignment, honestly. 6 months surrounded by the species that had humiliated my military and ended my career? It sounded like a form of psychological torture. Instead, it turned out to be the most educational experience of my life. What are they like? Asked the mollusk. When they're not being terrifying? Infuriating, I replied immediately. And fascinating, and completely impossible to predict. I thought back to my time in the human city of San Francisco. They have this concept called small talk. Meaningless conversation about weather, local events, personal trivia. I thought it was inefficient at first. Why waste time discussing irrelevant information? Why do they do it? Asked the crystalline student. Social bonding. They're constantly building and maintaining relationships with everyone around them. The human who served me food every morning knew my name, asked about my work, remembered that I prefer my beverages hot. Not because it was relevant to our transaction, but because that's how they interact with the world. I pulled up images from my stay. Humans going about their daily lives, working, playing, socializing. They're intensely curious about everything. I lost count of how many humans asked me questions about Centauri culture, biology, technology. Not for any strategic purpose, they just wanted to understand. Was it pleasant? Asked the arachnoid hesitantly. I considered the question carefully. Yes and no. Pleasant in the sense that they were universally welcoming and friendly. Unpleasant in the sense that being around humans is mentally exhausting. How so? They're constantly processing information, making connections, analyzing possibilities. Conversation with a human is like trying to keep up with a computer that's running 17 different programs simultaneously. They'll start talking about the weather, segue into agricultural policy, somehow connect that to interstellar trade, and end up asking your opinion on theoretical physics. I laughed, remembering some of the more surreal conversations I'd had. I once spent 3 hours discussing military tactics with a human who made decorative pottery for a living. She had insights into combined arms strategy that would have impressed our best generals. Chapter 16. The Day-to-Day Reality. Sir, ventured the multi-eyed student, what's a normal day like for humans when they're not fighting wars or building economic empires? That question made me pause, because the answer was both completely mundane and absolutely terrifying. They wake up, I said slowly, and immediately begin optimizing everything around them. I pulled up video footage from my stay, just random street scenes from San Francisco. Watch this. See that human crossing the street? She's not just crossing. She's calculating traffic patterns, weather probability, and optimal route efficiency while simultaneously conducting 3 separate conversations through her personal communication device. The students leaned forward, studying the footage. That human there, the one who looks like he's just walking his domesticated animal? He's actually monitoring 17 different news feeds, participating in 4 online debates, managing his investment portfolio, and teaching himself a new language, all while making sure his pet gets adequate exercise. That seems stressful, observed the gaseous student. That's just Tuesday for them, I replied. Humans have this concept called multitasking that they've elevated to an art form. What would take most species hours of focused effort, humans will accomplish as background noise while doing something else entirely. I switched to footage of a human workplace, a technology development center I'd been allowed to visit. This is what they call a casual Friday, I explained. Look at them. Comfortable clothes, relaxed atmosphere, people literally playing games during work hours. That doesn't seem very efficient, commented the Centauri cadet. That's what I thought too. Then I learned what they were actually working on. The display showed project summaries, faster-than-light communication systems, gravity manipulation technology, weapons that could disable entire fleets without causing casualties. These humans, in their casual work environment, were developing technology that's at least 50 years ahead of anything the rest of the galaxy has. And they were doing it while eating snacks and arguing about sports. How is that possible? Demanded the arachnoid. Because humans don't separate work from play. They find ways to make everything interesting. That group arguing about sports? They were actually debating statistical models that had applications to tactical analysis. The ones playing games? Testing reaction times and decision-making protocols for their next military simulator. I zoomed in on one particular human who was building something with small colored blocks while talking on a communication device. That human there was designing a new type of starship engine while having lunch, using children's toys as a visualization aid. The engine design, by the way, was revolutionary. It would have made our best propulsion systems look like paddle wheels. Chapter 17. The Innovation Problem. A new student spoke up. A hive mind representative who'd been silent throughout the lecture. Professor Krathos, from a collective intelligence perspective, Human innovation rates are statistically impossible. Individual cognitive units cannot generate breakthrough solutions at the frequency humans demonstrate. There must be hidden enhancement technology. I'd been waiting for someone to bring up the enhancement theory. It was a popular explanation among species that couldn't accept human baseline capabilities. No enhancement technology, I said firmly. I was subjected to every scan, probe, and analysis the Centauri medical corps could devise. Humans are exactly what they appear to be. Unmodified biological entities with naturally occurring neural architecture. Then how? Pressed the hive mind. Diversity, I replied. And I don't just mean genetic diversity, though that's part of it. Humans actively cultivate cognitive diversity. They train their minds to approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. I pulled up educational records from human institutions. Look at their learning systems. A human student doesn't just study one subject. They're required to learn mathematics, literature, history, science, art, and physical fitness. All at the same time. That seems inefficient, observed the crystalline student. Specialization allows for deeper expertise. True, but specialization also creates blind spots. Humans deliberately avoid overspecialization because they've learned that breakthrough solutions usually come from connecting ideas across multiple disciplines. I showed them a case study, the development of human hyperspace technology. This innovation came from a team that included a theoretical physicist, a jazz musician, a chef, an ancient literature scholar, and a professional athlete. The breakthrough came when the musician's understanding of harmonic resonance connected with the chef's knowledge of crystalline structures, informed by the scholar's research into mathematical poetry, and tested through the athlete's intuitive grasp of three-dimensional movement. The classroom was silent. Each individual contribution was modest, I continued, but the combination created something none of them could have achieved alone. That's how humans innovate. They don't just think outside the box. They question whether the box needs to exist at all. Chapter 18, The Military Philosophy. The young Centauri cadet raised his hand again. Sir, you've explained how humans fight and how they think, but what drives them? What's their military philosophy? That was probably the most important question anyone had asked, and I could tell from the sudden attention in the room that the other students recognized its significance. Humans, I said carefully, have a fundamentally different relationship with violence than most species. I pulled up comparative data on military doctrines across known space. Most species view military force as an extension of politics, a tool for achieving objectives. Humans view it as a failure of imagination. I don't understand, said the mollusk. Humans prefer to win without fighting. When they do fight, they prefer to end conflicts as quickly and decisively as possible. When they can't end conflicts quickly, they adapt their entire civilization to support prolonged warfare until they achieve their objectives. I showed them historical records from human military conflicts, their own species fighting among themselves before they achieved spaceflight. This is from their Second World War, I explained. Humans fighting other humans with primitive technology. Notice the industrial mobilization patterns. The data was staggering. Within months of conflict escalation, human societies had converted their entire economic output to military production. Civilian manufacturing plants retooled to produce weapons. Scientific research redirected to military applications. Educational systems modified to train military personnel. They didn't just fight, I continued. They transformed their entire civilization into a war machine, and when the conflict ended, they transformed back just as quickly. That's adaptable, admitted the arachnoid. Adaptable doesn't cover it. Humans can shift between peaceful cooperation and total warfare faster than most species can update their strategic planning. And they can maintain either state indefinitely. I pulled up more recent data from human military exercises. This is from last year. Joint training operations with 12 allied species. Look at the coordination levels. The footage showed seamless integration between human forces and various alien militaries. Humans adapting their tactics in real time to accommodate different physiologies, technologies, and combat doctrines. They don't just fight alongside allies, I observed. They become whatever type of military force the situation requires. Need heavy assault? They become heavy assault. Need stealth infiltration? They become stealth specialists. Need electronic warfare? They become cyber warfare experts. How is that possible? Asked the HiveMind representative. Training, I replied simply. Every human military unit is trained in every military discipline. Not to expert level, that would be impossible, but to competent level across the full spectrum of warfare. I showed them human military education data. A human Marine is trained in infantry tactics, vehicle operation, communications technology, field medicine, demolitions, logistics coordination, and about 50 other specializations. Any one of them can step into any role if needed. That must take years, observed the crystalline student. About 6 months of basic training, then ongoing education throughout their career, I replied. Humans have this remarkable ability to absorb and retain practical knowledge at accelerated rates when properly motivated. Chapter 19. The Motivation Factor. Which brings us to the question of motivation, I continued. What drives humans to achieve these impossible things? I paused the lecture and looked around the room. Anyone want to guess? Honor? Suggested the Centauri cadet. Conquest? Offered the arachnoid. Resource acquisition? Tried the mollusk. All reasonable guesses, I said. All wrong. I pulled up footage from my time on Earth. Humans going about their daily lives, working, playing, raising families. Humans are motivated by stories, I announced. The silence that followed was the kind you get when an entire room full of people thinks you've lost your mind. Stories, repeated the gaseous student. Stories, I confirmed. Humans organize their entire understanding of existence around narratives. They don't just experience events. They contextualize events within ongoing stories about who they are and what they're trying to accomplish. I showed them examples of human entertainment, their films, books, games, and other media. Look at these. Every piece of human entertainment is about someone overcoming impossible odds to achieve something meaningful. Heroes facing down overwhelming enemies. Underdogs defeating superior forces through cleverness and determination. Individuals making sacrifices for the greater good. Entertainment is not reality, pointed out the hive mind representative. For humans, the distinction is blurred, I replied. They don't just consume these stories. They try to live them. Every human sees themselves as the protagonist of their own heroic narrative. I pulled up military recruitment data. When humans join their military, they're not just signing up for a job. They're volunteering to become characters in the greatest story ever told. The defense of everything they care about against forces that would destroy it. That seems inefficient, observed the crystalline student. Emotional decision-making leads to tactical errors. Does it? I asked. Let me show you something. I displayed casualty ratios from every major conflict involving human forces in the last century. In every case, humans had been outnumbered, outgunned, or fighting in unfavorable conditions. In every case, they had achieved their objectives with minimal losses. Humans fighting for a story they believe in don't make tactical errors, I explained. They make tactical miracles. They find ways to win that no logical analysis would predict because they refuse to accept that their story could end in failure. Chapter 20. The Nightmare Scenario. Sir, asked the multi-eyed student, what happens when humans encounter a threat they can't defeat? The question hung in the air like a death sentence, because I'd seen what happened. We all had, though most species tried not to think about it. The Devourers, I said quietly. Every student in the room went very still. The Devourers were the nightmare that kept every civilized species awake at night. A hive mind collective that consumed entire solar systems, converting all matter into more Devourer units. They'd destroyed 17 civilizations before anyone had even figured out how to communicate with them. 2 years ago, a Devourer scout fleet entered human space, I continued. 50,000 ships, each one the size of a small moon. They began consuming the outer planets of the Sol system, working their way toward Earth. I pulled up tactical data from the engagement. The numbers were incomprehensible. The Devourer fleet had enough firepower to sterilize every inhabited world in the galaxy. The human response? I paused for effect. They evacuated Earth. A collective gasp from the students. They loaded every civilian they could fit onto transport ships and sent them to their colonies. Then they did something that defied all military logic. The display showed the final positions of human forces. Every ship, every weapon platform, every military installation positioned between the Devourer fleet and Earth's evacuation routes. They stood their ground, I said simply. 15,000 human ships against 50,000 Devourer ships. Outnumbered more than 3 to 1, and the Devourer ships were 1,000 times larger. That's suicide, whispered the arachnoid. That's humans, I corrected. The battle lasted 72 hours. When it ended, the Devourer fleet was gone. So was most of the human military. They won? Asked the Centauri cadet. They won, I confirmed, at a cost that would have broken any other species. 80% casualties. Their entire battle fleet destroyed. Their industrial capacity reduced to salvage and emergency production. How? Demanded the hive mind representative. I pulled up the final moments of the battle. Footage from automated recording systems that had somehow survived the engagement. They weaponized their own star, I said quietly. The display showed human ships flying directly into Sol, their hulls breached and their crews long dead. But their computers were still functional, still following their final orders. Every ship that couldn't fight anymore became a guidance system for a solar flare. They used their own dying vessels to direct stellar matter at the Devourer fleet, turned their home system's sun into the largest weapon ever deployed. The room was absolutely silent. The Devourers, I continued, had never encountered a species willing to sacrifice their own star to stop them. They couldn't adapt to tactics that defied the basic survival instinct. They were designed to fight enemies who wanted to live, not enemies who were willing to die for their story. "What happened to the humans?" asked the mollusk quietly. "They rebuilt," I replied. "Within a year they had restored their industrial capacity. Within 2 years they had a new battle fleet. Within 3 years they were back to pre-war strength." "How is that possible?" "Because every other species in the galaxy contributed to their reconstruction. When word spread about what humans had done, sacrificing their own star to stop the Devourers, every civilization in known space volunteered to help rebuild. I switched to current data showing human space bristling with defensive installations provided by dozens of different species. Humans saved the galaxy by being willing to destroy themselves for it. And the galaxy responded by making sure they never have to make that choice again." Chapter 21. The Current Situation. "So," said the young Centauri cadet, "what's the takeaway? What should we do about humans?" It was the question I'd been building toward throughout the entire lecture. The reason I was here instead of commanding a fleet somewhere. "You leave them alone," I said simply. "You trade with them fairly, you treat their allies with respect, and you absolutely, under no circumstances, give them a reason to consider you a threat." "But sir," protested the arachnoid, "surely there must be some way to counter their advantages. Some tactical approach that could level the playing field?" I looked at the eager young faces staring back at me and felt genuinely sorry for them. They still thought this was about military tactics and strategic analysis. "Let me tell you about the hierarchy of Vel," I said. The hierarchy had been the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Energy beings with technology that seemed like magic. Ships that could phase between dimensions. Weapons that could rewrite reality at the quantum level. They'd studied humans for decades, analyzing every battle, every innovation, every tactical decision. They'd identified what they believed were critical weaknesses in human psychology and technology. They waited until most of the human fleet was engaged in relief operations after a natural disaster. They struck with overwhelming force at a moment of maximum vulnerability. They had perfect intelligence, superior technology, and tactical surprise. I pulled up the battle data. It looked like a massacre. Human forces scattered across multiple systems, caught completely off guard, facing enemies they couldn't even touch with conventional weapons. The battle lasted 6 hours, I continued. When it ended, the hierarchy of Vel had ceased to exist as a coherent entity. "How?" asked multiple students simultaneously. "Humans don't fight the way anyone expects them to fight," I explained. "The hierarchy planned for conventional naval warfare, enhanced human tactics, even for psychological warfare designed to exploit human emotional responses. What they didn't plan for was humans deciding that the laws of physics were more like suggestions. I showed them footage from the battle. Human ships doing things that should have been impossible. Vessels flying through solid matter. Weapons firing around corners. Defensive systems that redirected attacks into alternate dimensions. Humans had been studying hierarchy technology every time they encountered it, I explained. Not to copy it. To understand the underlying principles. When the attack came, they were ready with countermeasures the hierarchy couldn't have imagined. They turned the hierarchy's own dimensional phasing technology against them. Used quantum manipulation to trap hierarchy ships in parallel realities, converted energy-based weapons into power sources for human systems. "But how did they develop such countermeasures so quickly?" demanded the hive mind representative. "They didn't develop them quickly," I replied. "They'd been preparing for that specific type of attack for 30 years, just in case. Humans have contingency plans for threats that don't even exist yet." Chapter 22. The Philosophy of Preparedness. This brings us to perhaps the most important thing to understand about humans, I continued. They are the most paranoid species in the galaxy, and their paranoia is completely justified. I pulled up human military planning documents, the ones they'd declassified for educational purposes. Humans maintain active defense plans for literally every possible threat scenario. Invasion by energy beings? They have a plan. Attack by machine intelligences? They have a plan. Assault by creatures from parallel dimensions? They have a plan for that too. "How many scenarios?" asked the crystalline student. "Current count is somewhere around 40,000 distinct threat profiles," I replied. "Each with multiple response strategies, resource allocation plans, and contingency protocols." The students looked appropriately horrified. And they update these plans constantly, I added. Every time they encounter a new species, every time they observe a new technology, every time someone publishes a theoretical paper about exotic physics, they ask themselves, how could this be used against us? And then they figure out how to counter it. That seems excessive, observed the gaseous student. Does it? I asked. Consider their track record. In the last 100 years, humans have been attacked by 17 different species, using 23 different technological approaches. They've successfully defended against all of them because they'd already figured out how to handle those types of attacks. I showed them a timeline of human conflicts. Look at the pattern. Each enemy thought they had some unique advantage. Superior numbers, advanced technology, exotic abilities. Each enemy discovered that humans had already considered and prepared for exactly that type of threat. Sir, asked the mollusk, do they have plans for defending against us? The question everyone had been thinking but afraid to ask. Yes, I said simply. They have 17 different response scenarios for potential mollusk aggression, 12 for crystalline expansion, 23 for various arachnoid threat models, and 47 for different types of hive mind infiltration. How do you know this? Demanded the hive mind representative. Because they told me, I replied. During my cultural exchange, I was given access to their basic defense planning databases. Not the classified stuff, just the general threat assessment protocols. They showed you their military secrets? They showed me the obsolete versions of their military secrets, the ones they've already replaced with better countermeasures. Humans are so far ahead in defensive planning that they can afford to share outdated strategies as educational material. I let that sink in for a moment. The plans they showed me were terrifying in their thoroughness and sophistication. And they were the old, outdated versions they didn't mind sharing with potential enemies. Chapter 23. The Real Message. I could see the students were getting overwhelmed, which was exactly what I'd intended. Understanding humans required a fundamental shift in thinking that most species found difficult to accept. Let me be very clear about something, I said, leaning forward for emphasis. I'm not here to make you afraid of humans. Fear leads to poor decision-making, and poor decisions around humans tend to be fatal. Then what's the point of all this? Asked the Centauri cadet. Respect, I replied. Understanding. Realistic assessment of capabilities and limitations. I pulled up a final display. Current diplomatic relationships between humans and other species. Look at this data. Every species that has chosen to work with humans has seen improvements in their technology, economy, and quality of life. Every species that has chosen to fight humans has either been defeated or learned to regret the decision. So we should ally with them? Asked the arachnoid. You should treat them as equals, I corrected. Humans respond well to honest dealing, fair trade, and mutual respect. They respond poorly to condescension, deception, and threats. And if we accidentally offend them? Asked the mollusk nervously. Apologize, I said immediately. Humans are remarkably forgiving if they believe the offense was unintentional. They're remarkably unforgiving if they believe you're trying to deceive or manipulate them. I switched to examples of successful human diplomatic relationships. The Gentle Collective accidentally destroyed a human research station during first contact. Navigation error combined with communication breakdown. The humans' response? They sent emergency relief ships to help with rescue operations and offered to share their navigation technology to prevent future accidents. That seems reasonable, admitted the crystalline student. Humans are reasonable, I agreed. Right up until you give them a reason not to be. The key is understanding where the line is and making very sure you don't cross it. What line? Asked the hive mind representative. Harm to innocent people, I replied without hesitation. Threaten human civilians, threaten their allies' civilians, threaten anyone who can't defend themselves. That's when humans stop being reasonable and start being terrifying. Chapter 24. The Warning. I looked around the classroom one final time, making eye contact with each student. I'm going to end this lecture with the same warning I give to every military leader, every politician, and every species representative I speak with, I said. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They're not the smartest or the most advanced or the most numerous. What they are is the most adaptable, the most determined, and the most creative. I pulled up one final image. Earth as seen from space, a small blue world orbiting an ordinary star. They evolved on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill them through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless other catastrophes. They survived by becoming incredibly good at solving problems under pressure. Now they're loose in the galaxy, and they've decided that most of our problems are just puzzles waiting to be solved. They see war as an engineering challenge. They see diplomacy as a coordination problem. They see the future as something they can build instead of something that happens to them. If you're smart, I continued, you'll find ways to benefit from that perspective. If you're not smart, you'll try to oppose it. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I was not smart, I admitted. I thought superior firepower and military tradition would be enough to defeat a primitive species. I learned differently, painfully. But here's the thing that took me years to understand. Humans didn't defeat the Centauri Empire to prove they were stronger. They defeated us to prove that strength isn't the only thing that matters. They could have destroyed us completely, could have turned our worlds into cautionary tales. Instead, they offered us partnership, trade agreements, and cultural exchange programs. Why? Asked the young Centauri cadet. Because that's who they are, I replied. They don't fight to dominate. They fight to protect. They don't win to conquer. They win to ensure that everyone has the chance to build something better. I powered down the displays and faced the classroom directly. So my advice to all of you, as future military leaders and diplomatic representatives, is simple. When you encounter humans, remember that you're dealing with a species that has spent their entire evolutionary history proving that impossible just means you haven't figured out the solution yet. Make friends with them if you can. Trade with them if they're willing. Learn from them if they'll teach you. But whatever you do, don't underestimate them. Don't threaten them. And absolutely, under no circumstances, should you ever give them a reason to view you as a problem that needs solving. Because if humans decide you're a problem, they won't just defeat you. They'll defeat you so thoroughly and completely that the solution becomes a case study for everyone else who might be considering similar mistakes. Epilogue. Questions and answers. After the official lecture ended, several students lingered for additional questions. The young Centauri cadet approached me first. "Sir," he said quietly, "do you regret your encounter with humans?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said finally. "It was the most educational experience of my military career. I learned that there's always room to grow, always something new to discover about what's possible." "But your career was based on outdated assumptions about how the galaxy works," I interrupted gently. "Humans didn't end my military career. They showed me that it was already obsolete. Better to learn that lesson in a classroom than on a battlefield." The hive mind representative approached next. "Professor, from a collective intelligence perspective, humans seem inefficient. How do they coordinate large-scale operations without central control?" "They don't coordinate," I replied. "They improvise. Every human unit is trained to operate independently while maintaining awareness of larger objectives. They don't need central control because they've internalized the mission parameters and can adapt in real time." "That sounds like chaos." "It looks like chaos," I agreed, "but it's actually a more sophisticated form of organization than most species can achieve. Humans have learned to create order from apparent randomness." The last student to approach was the multi-eyed one whose species I still couldn't identify. "Professor," it said, "you've described humans as both peaceful and terrifying. How do we know which version we'll encounter?" I smiled. "That's the beautiful thing about humans. You get to choose. Approach them with honest intentions and good faith, and you'll find them to be the most helpful, generous species in the galaxy. Approach them with deception or hostility, and, well, you'll get a very different experience." "It's like they're two different species." "No," I corrected. "They're the same species responding to different circumstances. Humans adapt to match the situation they're facing. If you treat them as friends, they'll be friends. If you treat them as enemies, they'll be enemies. The choice is entirely yours." As the students filed out, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my own perspective had changed. 5 years ago, I'd seen humans as a threat to be eliminated. Now I understood that they were actually the solution to problems I hadn't even known existed. The galaxy was a better place with humans in it, even if they did have this annoying habit of making everyone else question their basic assumptions about how things were supposed to work. But that, I'd learned, was just another human characteristic to appreciate rather than fear. They didn't just adapt to the universe,